I used to be a chemist. When I was 5, I wanted to be in the Beatles. I worked in life-saving pharmaceuticals for a long, long time, working on human insulin and first HIV drug. Then then I decided to become a business consultant, sort of after I moved through HR and out of a well-paid job. 34 years later, I'm still standing, to quote Elton John. That's me. And I've written 16 books on business and leadership. But around 2018, 2019, I started to think that politics was a subject that needed some of my attention. Other people disagree with that, but I started writing books. And this is the latest incarnation of the book Reboot Britain. It has proven to have got us keynote events because I do speaking as well in Somerset with Sadiq Al Hassan, the Labour MP. Took a real risk to have me down there. Didn't screen any of my slides. Let me speak and do the keynote there. And it has percolated through other parts of Labour, and we believe, and other political parties as well. But we believe that therefore it has stirred Labour's thinking, not to the point of submission, because we know where we are with Labour, but nonetheless, it stirred the pot a little bit. So, and people say to me, do these things work? Well, putting books in envelopes, taking them to Parliament, getting arrested nearly at the security things. Yes, they do work actually, because a book has a different social journey. It gets laid on tables, it gets passed around. It's really easy to throw away a PDF and an email, but it's not so easy to just discard a book. So yes, it does work. That doesn't mean to say everything else we do doesn't work, but it's part of the rich patina of stuff that we have to do in order to get listened to. So what I'm going to do is do a version of the 6 minute talk that I did at Somerset. It might take a bit more than 6 minutes, and then I'm going to whiz through some slides in about the same length of time, and then it's the floor is yours, because I'd really rather answer your questions than rap here and sort of just fill the space. So I'm going to try and do that. Shut me up if you think that I've said too much, and if you've like the person that came on a few minutes beforehand, the Brexiteer, his only means of expression was by taking all his clothes off. If that's your thing, then keep the camera off, please. It would be good. Okay, so let's go to this now. So I've done my introduction. I'm a Brexit fundamentalist insofar as I believe that the only good Brexit's a dead Brexit. And, it's true to say that nearly all the Brexit protagonists, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Liam Fox, all of those people, Boris Johnson, they've all been removed from formal power. Some of them are still wandering around in corridors. Some of them are on reality TV like Jacob Rees-Mogg, promising us to sell us cheap training shoes, not cheap training stews, and hormone-infested beef. But substantially, the Brexit culture carriers are no more. There's really just Nigel standing now. So when people say, "Oh, we can't because there's all these people still left," they're not in power. Actually, we did a tremendously good job, all of us, in removing them from power. Unfortunately, we've still got Brexit, and it is dead, but it's still in our living room instead of it being put into a grave. And my talk really is to explain why I think that's a very good idea. In this book, Reboot Britain, I talk about the impact of Brexit thus far across all of what the so-called steeple factors, that's social, economic, environmental, technological, political, legal, etc., ethical. So it isn't just an evaluation of the economics, which is what a lot of people think about. And I'm going to just whiz you through some of the main thoughts that we can have about those things and give you a preview of what's in the book. Economically, we're losing £100 billion every year due to Brexit and 40 billion in lost taxes. I think there's another estimate recently that said it was more than 100 billion and another one that said it was 93. Well, who's counting? We all are, actually. We're all counting the cost in supermarkets. But the point of the matter is, whether it's 93, 246 or 100 billion, it's far more than the 1.2 billion winter heating fiasco. It's far more than it would cost to fix social care and the recent car crash over PIP. We've suffered an enormous hike to the cost of living across the UK and in Ireland due to Brexit. By Northern Ireland, I mean by that. By the end of this Parliament, it's predicted that people will not feel better off, or they'll feel better off to the tune of -1%. And I heard Keir Starmer last night on Channel 4 News saying that we've had 14 years, the world of Tory austerity and what have you. And, no one has felt better off since 2008. Well, they're not going to feel better off by 2029. So it's -1%. Rachel Reeves simply cannot talk about growth without talking about ending Brexit. I'm hopeful she's going to do something on Wednesday, but I'm not very hopeful because they've already leaked most of it. So I don't think we're going to get a revelation on Wednesday. If we have, then I've got a hat somewhere in the house to eat. So that's the economics. In terms of the social impact, the sociology, Farage only mentioned Brexit twice since he's been forced to do it more recently. He only mentioned it last year twice as an MP. Quite surprising when you consider how much he mentioned it before. But instead, Nigel wants you to think about the boat people, the rapists, the gypsies, tramps, and thieves, to quote Cher. The truth of the matter is 90% of people coming here are perfectly legal and should be working. So all this palaver that Shabana Mahmood has gone on about removing illegal people, we are talking about small numbers of the whole. So of the 10% or so that arrive undocumented, a few of those will be criminals. Of course, they should be put in jail or sent back to their countries. This was much easier to do when we were a member of the EU, of course. Instead, we pay France to police their beaches. And living in this part of the country, in Kent, I'm sure you realise just how many people you'd need to put on a beach to have any chance whatsoever of stopping people getting into boats. It is futile. I'd like, there to be a solution around deterrence, but unfortunately, you'd need to police every 50 yards of the beach to do that. And I can't remember how long the beach is in France to Britain, but it's a long time. And we're not paying enough for them to do that, nor should we, of course. So people are rightly cross at the cost of housing immigrants in hotels when they could be working in our fields, in hotels, in social care, the NHS and other places. But this is really a product of our failed Home Office scheme that allowed a massive backlog to build up to fuel that hatred of foreigners via the gutter press, in other words, the Mail, the Express and so on. So lots more we could say on social stuff, but there's a taste of that. Environmentally, Brexit is a tragedy in slow motion. I'm not going to claim that Brexit causes climate change. No, I'm not. But it does amplify the impacts of climate change because of the need to send stuff around the world, and it increases our carbon footprint basically. And the farmers know this very well because we signed deals with New Zealand for land, and we are currently. I'm sorry, Keir Starmer. I said this to the Labour guy. I thought we were going to have a turning point with Big Daddy Trump. We were going to say, no, nay, no, nay, never, Mr. Trump. We're not having your rotten meat and your rotten products. But in fact, we are succouring him to some degree. And we didn't need to be so sycophantic to Trump, I think. Other leaders have got it right. This means we'll have to eat Trump's poor quality meat. That's not a metaphor. And ultra processed foods, which are, mainly coming from that part of the world. And Brexit, therefore, is a root cause behind many of the things that people voted for in last year's general election. My MP in the local area, I went up, stood a candidate against her, and she tried to say, as a Labour MP, that nobody had mentioned Brexit on the doorstep. And I countered that, and she didn't come back at me. I said, no, they haven't. But they do mention all the offspring of Brexit. That's the cost of living, food prices, NHS, and so on. So they all have at least one foot in the Brexit condition as a major root cause. Some others were exacerbated by COVID and Putin's war in Europe. That's true. But when Keir Starmer says, I'm here to fix the fundamentals, this does mean confronting the Brexit elephant in the room. And in a small way, I'm grateful to him last night on Channel 4 News because he did manage to get Brexit in the sentence, but he quickly got moved on to the Tories and austerity. And Brexit is for life. It's not just a sort of a thing that we do for a few years. So therefore, we've got to kill it. Starmer also said that he will not break the Brexit red lines, but he has already. The Gibraltar reset means that Gibraltar becomes a de facto member of Schengen, the EU single market. The Northern Ireland reset means that Northern Ireland is in the EU single market, and that people enjoy freedom of movement within the Republic and therefore the EU. And this other piece of brilliant civil service jargon, the Product Regulation Metrology Bill, that doesn't trip off the tongue very easily, does it? The Product Regulation Metrology Bill. It breaks the promise of our Brexit independence of laws. With this bill, we're effectively accepting dynamic alignment with EU standards. And I'll return to this later on because people say, oh, we can't rejoin because we've diverged too much. Actually, we haven't. So Boris said we'd take back control of our borders, laws, and money with instant gratification and no downsides. In fact, we're poorer. We've altered just two laws out of 1600, and we have more immigration because of Brexit. So these are not Brexit betrayals, as the Brexiteers would have us believe. They're simply a pragmatic acceptance of the fact that Brexit cannot work in any form whatsoever. So that's the downside. That's what we had, and most of us know all this. So I'm just saying stuff you already know. But what's the upside? If we rejoin the EU, we can then look at growth by recovering some of that 100 billion yearly losses. People say, oh, the ship has sailed. Companies have adapted. Yes, they have adapted. Companies have adapted by going out of business, shutting up shop, moving to Europe, or just changing what they do. And one near neighbour I have is a chap called Paolo Arrigo, who runs a seed business up in North London. He reckons he can last one more year, and if he doesn't get the phytosanitary agreement, then he's going to go out of business. So some people are just treading water. So that is not adapting, that's coping. So if we rejoin the EU, can look at recovering some of those losses. We can deal with the massive deficits in employment in certain critical sectors, such as farming, care, the NHS, and so on. We could also deal with the question of immigration properly on a European-wide basis, rather than having to be at the mercy of the EU as a third country. In conclusion, I'll start as I began. The only good Brexit is a dead Brexit. Starmer's death by 1,000 ameliorations is still death, whichever way you look at it. In real life, I'd rather have a rapid death than a slow, painful one. Britain is better than this, having left the EU only to find we're at the mercy of the orange psychopath, formerly known as Donald J. Trump. I believe that we must apply to rejoin the EU as a priority to fix the ills that have now become apparent. Most people didn't know what they were voting for in 2016. Now that we do, we can change only if we have the courage to do so. Courage is coming rather slowly, but it is coming. So to summarise, here are the opportunities. I've mentioned them, so I don't need to go through them. Get your money back, get your freedom of movement sorted out, guard against Trump, tech cartels, be able to make better decisions globally, and remove all the annoying barriers to collaboration, which are coming over the hill quite soon, such as passport control and things like that. Lots of stuff. And of course, the big one in terms of Ukraine, it costs us 37 pence a day to be in the EU. And we had nearly 70 years of relative peace for that. That's not a bad deal, actually. The economics there, we can't have growth without dealing with a 4.5% resilience drag. It's now reckoned to be 6, growing on 8 into the future. So it's a huge amount. 3% was enough to crash the economy in 2008 globally. This is 4.5%, which is just dragging on us. It's more than the 22 billion or whichever figure we've got today from Rachel Reeves. And it has resulted in a significant money transfer. And we can't avoid tax. We can't fix it with tax rises. Denial is not a river in Europe, Egypt even. And of course, the social impacts are just as important as the money. Hate crimes have probably got another spike this year, I would imagine. There was one in 2016. There was one about 2019 when the Brexit was settled. These are identifiable rises in crime. So people say flag shagging is a neutral thing. It's not. I have specific experience of people, threatening women and children around here if they're foreign. So, and David Cameron made that critical error. He thought that he would lose the election, so he didn't have to do the referendum, and he completely misunderstood Farage's weaponisation of migration. And the Farage riots cost 32 million in 2024. I think they will have cost a lot more this year because they had more of them. Well, the number of police surrounding the hotels is absolutely outrageous. Important that they did it, but an outrageous cost. And farming and Brexit, there we are, a farming protest. Don't know why that's in there. But to quote Lou Reed, in life you reap what you sow, or maybe it's someone else I should be quoting there. We could do what we want with it. We could improve the NHS. We can't fix the NHS. It's a long-term project, but we can't fix it. I'd made this list of reasons that people tell me that now is not the time to do anything. And it's not an extensive list, but it's quite frivolous in some cases. Nonetheless, it tells a certain truth about our side of the curve, in terms of the things that people say about what we should or can't do about Brexit. Remainers often are just as bad as the Brexiteers, but in a much nicer way because they use logic and thought. But they do say things like this: "We must have a referendum," and nobody wants that. Actually, we probably might end up with a referendum, but we don't need one. And I have specific intelligence about that. You can ask me questions about that if you want. Um, so we don't need a referendum to do that. We'll get a worse deal. In any case, the EU is crumbling. I mean, these people don't understand macroeconomics. Yeah, the world is having a bit of a disappointing time with that people are not consuming enough stuff. And therefore, the Western world in particular feels the pain of that. But the EU isn't particularly crumbling. One or two countries in Eastern Europe are not doing as well, and all the rest of it. So that's not necessarily true. We'll have to have the euro and the Schengen. As Barnier said, everything is on the table until we take it off the table. Yes, we could probably. I don't see why we shouldn't have the euro actually, but we might not have to have the euro, but it might come at a terrible price if we decided not to have that. That's all for the debate as to would ensue with politicians. It's above my pay grade to worry about that. What we need to do is get our politicians to the point of wanting to rejoin. And if they do that behind closed doors, that's fine by me. But yeah, we don't necessarily have to have those things, but they may come at a price because, we've misbehaved in the past. We won't meet the criteria for an application, hogwash. We must sort Ukraine out first. We must have a parliamentary inquiry. We must have first past the post sorted. They're what I call Gantt chart problems, where people put one thing in front of another in a serial circuit, like an electrical circuit, rather than a parallel circuit. And they've got their own version of the serial circuit, and it's different than everyone else's version. This is why we're not united, of course, because they say we can't have this until we have that. And it isn't a serial circuit either. Macro politics doesn't work like that. The EU don't want us back. There is no advantage for them. That's hogwash as well. There's huge political advantage. I can explain that. We must wait until Nigel's dead. No, Keir's doing his best. No, he's not. Rejoin wasn't in Labour's manifesto. Of course, it wasn't. Mike Galsworthy tells us we must wait. Well, they're all signed up to Labour. They're all part of that sort of Fabian tradition of do slow, steady change in a world which is now disruptive. The EU won't want a hokey cokey Brexit. That can be solved by terms and conditions. We must get over it. We got the wrong Brexit. The people have spoken. Now they spoke shite. And so on. There's an R in the month, and the only good reason is my cat is unwell. That's the only good reason to not rejoin now, in my view.